Why, hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Voices of Resilience series here on Facebook Live. My name is Nathan. I'm with Lost&Found, and we're consistent about Thursdays, even if we aren't always at the same time. So I hope you all are finding this time, and maybe 6 o'clock is the time we go with. So we're just going to test it out, see what happens. I'm really excited today to have our guest, but before I introduce him, I just want to once again remind you about Lost&Found. We are an organization that focuses on building resilience in college students, student singular, but also plural. And as we work with our students just to make sure that they have preventative factors in place to build strong mental health, because life throws curveballs at you. We're all aware of that. Life is throwing us all some curveballs right now. And being able to be resilient and take those things and rebound from them is really important to us. So we get to focus in on that, and we do that in a variety of ways. And one of the ways is by working with awesome partners like Don here. I've got Don Carter here, and I'll just give his quick bio and I'll let Don get going. But Don, he's had a previous decade-long law enforcement career, and now through his transformational work with executives, entrepreneurs, and visionary leaders, Don Carter wields the power of authentic kindness to inspire and implement changes into his world for its betterment. It's his mission to help people shift their perceptions of the world to prove that it's not as hostile as they believe. These shifts help bring about dynamic transformation for his clients toward deeper healing and greater expression of their untapped potential. And I can say, Don and I would say we don't know each other well yet, but we've had several conversations, and we always have to cut him off because we could probably keep going for 3 hours or a day. And I'm just excited to get to spend some time with you here, Don. So Don, I'll let you go. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? And
yeah, Nathan, thank you, man. I really appreciate being here, and I really appreciate being able to get to know you and understand what Lost&Found does. It's close to my heart, as we've talked about, specifically because of some pieces of my story. But I mean, as far as my background, I'm a Black American male. I grew up in inner city Kansas City, just a typical urban Black neighborhood where I say typical because we have this, at least I have a perception of what that means. A little disinvestment, lower income, and just a few other things that characterize urban Black neighborhoods, blighted housing. There's some violence, some gangs, but all in all, I had a community around me, specifically with my family, that in the midst of all of that sense of unsafety, which I felt as a child for sure, I still grew up in a place of understanding that my well-being was intact, and so that just led me to a life of service, and I knew that I would spend my life serving other people, and eventually that led me to law enforcement, like you mentioned. I spent about 10 years in law enforcement, both as a patrol officer and as a detective, and really exited out of that because I felt like I needed to reclaim my humanity. I had gotten to the point of having a disconnect from the reason that I become a police officer. So I moved from a place of wanting to serve to a place of survival, just mental and emotional. And that was the time that I really began to transform. Uh, I say reclaiming my humanity just because I wanted my heart to come alive again. And so that led me into more work with my community. I started getting involved with tech startup stuff that was happening, starting to brew. And then that eventually landed me working for a Kansas City company that took me out to the West Coast. And shortly after that is when what I mentioned is close to my heart for your organization, is when my wife died by suicide. And so the healing journey that I've been on thus far, from the traumas that I endured in law enforcement, um, it propelled me even further when I had that devastating experience of losing my wife to suicide. And the things that I discovered about healing and about grief are what really dictate um, what I do now, which is serving my clients, who I call visionary leaders, of people who have a really big vision for themselves and for the world. And they want to play bigger in life and in their business or whatever endeavors they're in, but they just feel stuck in something. they feel anchored by something. And what I've learned is that it's usually an unidentified trauma or unresolved grief experience. And so we just do the work to heal that. So
Yeah, and I know that story about your wife, that we've talked about it, and we imagine a world where no one thinks about self-harm behaviors and no one thinks about suicide as an option. And
yeah.
yeah, I wish that wasn't a story that we all knew too well.
Mm-hmm.
We've all experienced, but I don't want to scoot away from this serious topic, but I do want to mention, and I'd love for you to share this part of your story. But
Yeah.
For those of you watching, whether it's now or later, Don has been recognized on kind of a national scale for something really cool. He told me this story, and my response in the middle of it was, "That was you." I just very blatantly remember that happening. So, Don has this really cool story of just kindness and
Yeah.
care for people that maybe you don't even know. And I'd love, Don, I'd love for you just to share that quick before we dive into some of these other topics.
Yeah. The key components to everything that I do are speak to that subject of kindness. And it was really through a deepening of the understanding of what kindness actually can be. Um, the story in particular is when I was driving through a drive-through in my neighborhood after a long day. So I was hungry. They were about to close, and I see a girl in the drive-through, and she just looks exhausted. So I felt exhausted, and I was like, man, it's almost over. I just wanted to give her some encouragement or something. And then we just got into a subsequent conversation about 30 seconds, and I learned that she wanted to be a nurse. And I just carried that with me as I drove away. But then by the time I got home, I just had this thought hit me, like, you should pay for her to go to nursing school. And I didn't know what that was about, how to do it, didn't have the money, but I had a network. And so I just mobilized my network to, I called it Send a Random Girl to Nursing School. And I just asked like 300 people in my Facebook community to donate $5 each so we could send her to nursing school to get her CNA license. And then it just blew up from there. And what was interesting about that was just the fact that something so simple. So I asked 300 people out of my 1,300 Facebook friends to give $5, and all I did was give 10. So I make the ask, and then I hold myself accountable, double that. And people were hailing me as like the king of kindness and all of that stuff. So it was really weird. I was like, why is something so simple being made such a big deal? And it was this thing that really piqued my interest, was recognizing that people's hearts are shifting right now. And this was 3 years ago. But people are eager to do good toward one another. That's what I learned. And so facilitating a means by which that somebody could do something good for someone else, and that they trust you as a source of that. Because I know that my social capital was a big piece of that, that people saw me as a decent person, I guess. But it was just more the fact that I gave them a way to do something good, that they could believe in. And so kindness and this understanding of it just deepened in my life. And I went on a 3 months after that, and there was big media coverage, and we went on the Steve Harvey show and just all sorts of crazy stuff. All in all, she was probably given around $20,000 to go toward her her endeavors of whatever kind, because I didn't want it to be something that was just about what I said. I wanted it to be to uplift her life. And so it just still sent me diving into this journey of really discovering what it is that is going on in people's hearts. And so I nurtured it in my own, which is where for 3 months subsequent to that, every inclination that I had to do good towards somebody, I just did it. And I actually made it to where it was an exercise of flexing that muscle that maybe had gotten deadened over time, um, through traumatic experiences or through, just life, just regular life, and how we feel wounded by it sometimes. Um, and that really helped me get a deeper understanding of kindness, which, in my opinion, is not about doing good things for people. It's about how we see the world. And that kindness literally means to be in the state of kind. So NESS means to be in the state of whatever word is before it. And kind, I was like, what does that even mean? Because you just think of like, oh, being nice or doing something nice with somebody. That, but where we use it the most is when we talk about things that are alike. And so kindness is being in the state of recognizing that you are like whatever it is that you're observing. And when you're talking about other human beings, that's a very basic thing. But since we've been conditioned in our society to see each other primarily in terms of our differences, it's a complete shift. Like I look at someone and I see, I'm categorizing all the things that I observe about them: white male, black female. If I know anything about their religious stuff, like I'm categorizing, or I see somebody represent a political party. And so we've been inundated with that over and over and over again, probably the whole of all of our lives who are alive today in this society. And so the consequences of that have been we see ourselves as other than the world. But kindness is where we're able to see ourselves as like the world that we're in. And it's a powerful transforming thing. And it's what really helped me heal a lot of the traumas I experienced in law enforcement, and even after I lost my wife to suicide.
Yeah, that's just, I said, that's so poignant, especially as what we're here to talk about a little bit tonight.
Yeah.
That you just were conditioned to see the differences, and I hate that that's true.
Yeah. It's good that we can see it though.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I just went to my head. I'm like, I do that when I walk out. I mean, even if I see it's even something as simple as being like, man, that person has a nice car, or that
Yeah.
you see whatever's different, and you don't look for the similarities. And
Yeah.
and that's honestly, folks, by the way, I want to mention, if you are watching, you have questions. I have questions, but as I say every week, you really probably don't want to hear me talk all the time. So let's get some of your questions out there. And like I said, this conversation today, Don and I had talked a couple of weeks prior, and we were like, hey, yeah, let's talk about getting you on our Facebook Live show. It'll be awesome. And then the world took a crazy turn, as we're well aware, as we've been dealing with the issues of race and police brutality, and just it's on a national scale. And Don, you posted on Facebook, as a person of color and a former police officer who wants to hear my story. And I was like, I do. I think we all want to hear your story. And so I guess this is such a broad question, but I guess what is your thought? What are your thoughts on what things are happening right now? Because when it's been what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and it feels in some ways like things are quieter, and I don't want them to be quieter. We were just talking about that. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on the current state of affairs that going on in our country?
Yeah. So I believe that we are in a time of great healing, and that in order to heal things, like if you have a wound that's festering, or if you have some sort of injury that's unexposed to the light, you don't get the opportunity to tend to it. And so even the quarantining and the pandemic and all of that stuff that caused the whole world to be on the same page about something that was affecting all of us, it made us aware of the fact that we are connected, and that somebody who is in another country can affect a whole nother country if they are transferring a virus. So we recognize that, and then we start doing things for each other that are really simple but that are protective. So we're being able to think like we're connected to each other, and like we understand how we affect each other's lives. Now, bring in the killing of George Floyd, and the subsequent publicizing of Black people who were killed by police. It's opening up the curtains to see something that's always been there, but for some people they weren't able to see it. Some still can't see it, but the awakening that's happening in people's hearts again.
Oh, Don, I think you froze on me. Oh boy. Well, gang, this is what happens when we have a live video here. So we'll see if Don unfreezes here, and we'll keep plugging along. Oh, there you go. There you are. The last thing I heard was an awakening going on in people's hearts.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. So the same thing is happening again as we look at what is going on in the culture that we live in. And so even though it's really, really uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable for me, as a Black man to relive or to even recognize some things that I didn't realize were present in my own heart and in my own experience. Um, and so it is really uncomfortable, but I do believe that it's for our good. I do believe that it's for the best, that it gives us an opportunity. How else can we address something if we don't see it, if we're not aware of it? So this awakening and the awareness of um, even just the way that people in our society are being affected by the way the system works, by the hands of police in particular, because it's a serious deal. But here's what I believe that it's come down to, and it goes back to what I told you before, that we've been conditioned to see each other as fragments of human beings. We see each other in terms of our differences. So if I have some um, understanding of one part of your identity, I think I know everything about you. And it's the way the human brain works so that we can actually survive and categorize things and simplify our understanding of the world. But as human beings and the complexities that we actually exist in, it doesn't benefit us. It actually makes us objectify people. And then by virtue of how we look at other people, it's how we see ourselves. It's a reflection of how we see ourselves. And so you can't objectify another human being without objectifying yourself. You can't dehumanize somebody else without dehumanizing yourself. And so we then don't give ourselves permission to have the full spectrum or fuller spectrum of human experiences, which are vast. And so we pigeonhole each other and ourselves in a way that I think we need to be healed from. One of my good friends, when I had a conversation with him specifically about the police and racism issues, and he's a white male. He called me obviously after these things were going on, just from my perspective, being a Black man and having been a police officer. And but one thing that came up in our conversation I think is really true is that we are healing from stories that are too small for us. Like that's what he said. He said, we're healing from stories that are too small for us. We've been living in these little boxes of what we think it means to be us. And thankfully, we're getting the opportunity to be broken out of that. So the dehumanization and subjugation of a certain sect of people in a society that has been um, gone throughout the whole culture, the whole time that this country as we know it has been set up, like that has to come to account. And so it's painful because nobody wants to look at the ugliness in their life or the pain in their existence or of their neighbors. Um, but it's good ultimately. So that's what I feel about it. And that all of the unrest is just the precursor to a time of deeper and greater healing as people start to have conversations, genuine, heartfelt, gracious conversations about this stuff and the ways that our lives are affected.
I think back 2 weeks back, we had someone on. His name is Vani Harari, and he said something that I just haven't been able to get out of my head. He's like, you know what? In any other time, we might have been able to move past this, but as pandemic, sports are canceled. No new superhero movies coming out. Like we can't ignore it. It's not. We have this focus, and I think that focus, like you said, is it's good. I am the king of self distraction, and I know that it's we have that on a massive scale. And you said something too, like I am not. I say this every the last 3 weeks now. We've been having conversations that I just am not the right person to be having per se, but I love being able to facilitate and hear from people who know so much more about topics that I just don't have that experience. I haven't had the experience of being a person of color. I haven't had the experience of being a police officer. I haven't had all this. And so I just want to say I'm so grateful for you to be willing to share and spend that time,
man,
because it's important.
Absolutely. But your attitude toward those things that you think that you can't speak to clearly or knowledgeably, that kind of attitude and that demeanor about the subject matter is really commendable too, because it just is. It's like, oh, I don't really know about this. And there's something that all of us don't know. And so we can always be listening. We can always be turning to each other to understand the other first and cultivate conversations that way, where instead of assuming we know things that we don't or condemning people for things, the little things that we think we know, we just listen. And so I believe the conversations are some of the most important work that we are doing right now. And people's willingness, again, your willingness to have conversations about things outside of what you already know,
Yeah.
that's commendable.
Turns out I don't know a whole lot. That's what I've learned as I that
Yeah, just like the rest of us.
one thing I wanted to ask you, because I'm backing up a little bit. You mentioned talking about how we as just human beings are made to categorize. We look at things and we see things, and it's kind of you said a method of survival, and that's very true. But I think too, from your experience when you were a police officer, like I don't know how the like you talked to me about a typical job structure. I probably know how that goes, but you were a detective, so I know you didn't just like show up and become a detective. So I want to know, I guess, what are your thoughts on like you on just the police system, the structure, but also the like you mentioned like that categorization. Like you, in some ways, you have to be able to, as a police officer, probably had to be able to be like, okay, this is what I see with people. And you mentioned your heart kind of getting hardened. Like, I feel like that had to be maybe a big part of that. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I would say so. I think that when I got to the point of only objectifying human beings and suppressing my own humanity, so if I felt emotion or if I got to a place where I wanted to be connected to others, especially people who I was not necessarily in a critical situation with, but even just showing up on a 911 call or showing up as a detective to investigate something, there's a level of distance that you're supposed to keep to maintain objectivity, which being objective is really, it's an interesting concept to think about because in one sense, we can never really be objective because we have all of these things that we have going on. We have our own biases, we have our own perspective, we have our own knowledge, we have all these things. And so being objective is really kind of a silly thing to think about, but to make the effort to be as objective as possible, that makes sense. But when I show up somewhere, um, it's all me. But if I'm suppressing the parts of me that come up in that time, that definitely is because I've made an object of something that is usually a person who feels something or a person who is experiencing a heartache or experiencing a trauma or is victimized. Like if I come there with my whole heart, yeah, it'll make it more difficult to do the job the way that it's done now because I become a part of it. And so there's an argument for that, but that's definitely the thing that actually causes the heart to harden. And in my case, it disconnected me for the reason that I became a police officer in the first place, which ultimately led me to realize that this is my opinion right now too, that law enforcement as it sits now is not a good vehicle for serving people for their betterment. It's a reactive field in nature. So and if you want to have a proactive positive impact, it's just not structured for that.
I get that 100%. I know we've talked about I mentioned it with just our organization as a whole, trying to be on the front end of stuff and be proactive. It's just we are often in a variety of ways, in a variety of situations, just stuck in the having to respond and not being able to initiate that the stuff that's going to be there to keep the response from being necessary. And I think too, something that I know we've talked about as we were just kind of prepping for this call a bit was, you kind of mentioned the whole police system. And so my question, I guess, for you is like, do you think is it a little of both, or is it more one than the other? Like, are some of these issues happening because of the system in place? Are they happening because of the individuals? Because I think I mentioned to you, I know several officers here in Sioux Falls where we live, and it's like they seem like they just have this wonderful heart for people. And when they get, I know that it has to hurt when when they see all this hatred towards police, because like you said, they got into it for the reason of, I want to help, I want to serve, I want to protect. And it's that blanket statement, but at the same time, that blanket statement we've seen time and again in the last couple of weeks, like a constant stream of these things happening. So
there's way more than you don't see.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about all the years before we had smartphones that are catching this stuff too.
Yeah, yeah, right.
We've got decades and decades upon decades of stuff that we just don't, we don't know. And so I guess, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So initially, and I'll just make this statement so that this is a little clearer. I think that when we look at the things that are happening now that are catching our attention, we're looking at results. We're not looking at causes. We're looking at the back end of stuff where this is the result of something that has already been going on. Law enforcement, by nature of their creation, of what they were made to be, are the strong arm of the executive branch of government. So it's like they're the touch point for something that happened way before the police officers exist. And so we have to look at our history and all of that. But I likened it to this, and this is the only analogy that made sense to me, that if we're only looking at these killings as the cause of the unrest and the problem, it's similar to having somebody with a cough and giving them a cough drop when they might have COVID-19. You know what I'm saying? Like there's something else that's at the core. And if you're trying to treat the result or the symptom of this, then you're not going to get very far. It's a good start to bring some relief, but it's not the issue. And so I think America as a whole, Western culture as a whole, we have to reckon with what it is that we've actually been. And we're a violent nation. Like we justify violence, we laud violence, we celebrate violence until it's done to us or until it's done to whoever we care about. And so that's something that we have to reckon with. Like, why are there so many? Um, why do we value these instruments of strife and violence? It's because it's just been a part of the whole process. Even how the country was founded, it's like it's rooted in those things. And so to come to bear with those things is difficult. And that's stuff that people reluctantly will look at. So policing itself is a piece of that system that has been made to subjugate and to objectify human beings, to use them for the economic engine of this system that we have, to where the wealth of this country was built on free labor. And that free labor was gotten because of violence. And so we're just seeing like little pieces of the same thing that's been going on the whole time in our young nation's history, because we are a really young society. And so when people act like slavery was a long time ago and they think that it's so far back, like you're literally talking, we have talked to people who were slaves. It's not that long ago. And even illegally, even when slavery was illegal, there were still other systems that were set up inside to replace that. And so we just have to reckon with all of that stuff. And so policing to me is just an end result of that thing. That our policing system, the way that it's structured, has some of its roots in slave patrol, keeping the people in line who are the lower caste of society. And so to simplify it, what I feel like police system is the wealthy and I use these terms loosely, but the people who are in power utilizing the working class to keep everybody in line for their benefit. And so if you talk about who benefits from the system the most, um, that's when it gets a little sticky, because you start talking about white privilege and things like that, where people think that if they have some hardship in their life that they aren't privileged. Well, we have American privilege, if you wanted to call it that, that even what we consider poverty is way more advanced than other people in the world. So it's just a matter of what you're willing to look at. And as we reckon with our own history and then our own personal biases that come from that environment, those are the steps to really starting to reckon with what is happening. And it's all in our hearts. And so the systems will have to change because our hearts will change.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that you said what you just shared there about the level of being aware of what privilege is. It doesn't mean that life isn't hard. It doesn't mean that you haven't gone through some junk. And it doesn't mean that there's people who don't have things better than you. It just means that some things are easier.
Yeah, that you have the privilege of not having to think about what it means to be white, while non-white people in the system always encounter whiteness. And so that's what that's what white privilege can mean then, is that you have the privilege of not even having to think about race. But if where I am, I'm consciously aware of the fact that I'm Black because I'm being reminded all the time. And so, um, but we're all here and we all inherited the systems that are in place. And so the question is now, what do we do in response to the awareness or the awakening to these things that we're learning? And if we continue to just push them aside, like trying to deny that they exist, then we'll just continue things on the way that they have been going. And that would be good for some.
Yeah, it would be good for some. You're not wrong.
But everybody's valuable. So that's the key, is that I believe that life continues to produce life and that all the things that are occurring are for our best evolution and best benefit. And so, what a gracious thing for us to be saved from our own self interest, that we don't have to just, or we aren't held captive by our own perspectives alone. And that we become bigger once we get more perspectives from each other because our personal experiences matter. It's just that we have to look at them in conjunction with our neighbors. And I believe that when we start to do that, we'll have the ability to really have a society that benefits more people. Like we claim to have this freedom and such for all. So that's some of the issue, is that we've been lying to ourselves. We aspire to be a certain kind of society, but the actual experience of many is much different. And so we have to acknowledge that. That's just something that's, we got to just not be bound by our own illusions.
Don, I think maybe I skipped over this, but I'm sure people who are watching probably are curious. What was your experience being? I mean, you've had a lot of experiences from. I mean, I'm not trying to negate from day one. Your experience has been, you've had all these things that have shaped you, but specifically, I'd be interested to hear, like, what was your experience like being, like I said, a police officer, going into it to be one who was serving, wanting to give back, but also being a person of color. And we look at you look at the data and you see what arrest stuff looks like, and you can say what you want about that, but the data's there, and you see what it is. Like, how was that experience for, I don't even know how to say it. How was that experience?
I think I get what you're asking. Is like being a Black man and being a police officer, what was it like?
Yeah,
It was heavy, it was challenging, it was and I didn't associate it with race at first. Like I wasn't one to just think about it was because I was Black that this thing was or wasn't happening. But what really started to help me see was my interactions with my superiors, my so first of all, I didn't have any direct experiences of what I would consider as racism or discrimination based on race that I was aware of. I feel like I was in a system that there were certain things that were always there. And I say system loosely. I was in a neighborhood that there were things in place that made me feel like my life was in danger because I was Black. And it does have to do with some of the violence and some of the weapons and all that. But I know that the people who have those things didn't bring them into my neighborhood. And so the question is, who did? How did it get there? So I'm not saying that, but any direct, like actual feelings of felt racism or discrimination, I did not get personally until I became a police officer. And so that fact right there was something that was eye opening for me. Were you gonna say something?
I was just gonna say that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That
As
me.
as I reflect on it, that's been the experience. And then I had another officer who was actually one of my old partners. He was like, "Yeah, same for me, man." Like I didn't have any felt sense of it until I got in that culture, because as a Black man in that culture, you either have to assimilate or you're ostracized. And it's not the intention. And I don't want to vilify the individuals or whatnot, but it's the culture. It's what's celebrated in the culture, and police culture is what I'm talking about in particular, and that is the objectification of mainly Black people. And I won't say it's only, but I definitely would say mainly. And we think we could. You can ask the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because you're like, oh, well, you need a lot of police officers because there's a lot of crime in Black neighborhoods. Well, where did the crime come from? Or you could either say, oh, those are just dirty, dusty people that are whatever characterization you want to give it. Or you could look at what caused the situation that created the environment that fostered what we call criminal activity. Um, and you could go down and say it's just the human heart, like people are just this way. Um, and I would actually argue that environment has the biggest impact on what we become. And so when you have structures societal levels that are put in place, um, you're going to have these concentrated areas of certain kind of activity, and so then the police resources go there, and so now you have the recording of these. So the stats start to prove true what you already thought by putting the officers there. So then now you're like, oh, crimes increased. This it's really just the reporting of the crime, or the catching of the crime, or whatever you want to say it is, because there's more police resources there. I mean, if you did that, and I had this question asked to me just the other day, is that, we all know where the drugs are, but you don't ever see a SWAT team raiding a college campus. It's like the statistics actually show that drug use is pretty even between blacks and whites, but why are blacks actually convicted and sent to prison for long sentences more than whites are? And I'm just using those as two extreme examples. Obviously, there's more people in our society than just who we call black and white. But the structure that, the way that our justice system works, or the way that policing works, it's apparent what the point is. And as a black man in that, it was really challenging to see those things and actually be a part of them. So as a black man with black people, there was a couple of different responses, because I was patrolling neighborhoods that were like the one I grew up in, and even the one that I grew up in. And it was difficult when I would be, this is the way a lot of police officers are received, especially in those areas. They show up to help, they show up to respond to a shooting or respond to this, and there's no communication or collaboration with the communities that are hit the hardest, because there's no trust. And so then they see me, a black man, and there's either the response of, oh, okay, we have somebody that we can talk to, or get out of here, you Uncle Tom, whatever. Like you get pegged one way or the other. And so it was a really heavy burden to bear. And I didn't even realize how much. And I'm actually feeling emotional as I think about this now, because, yeah, all of the things that are happening now are having me go back and reflect, like, what was my experience? Like things that I maybe just glossed over. And the pain is real. And so the experience of black officers is one that is very multifaceted, because you have the pressure of being a police officer and the pressure of being black in America.
Thank you for being really vulnerable and sharing that. So I know this is kind of off topic, but I know you mentioned you had to police your home, where you grew up.
Yeah.
You're back where you grew up right now.
Yep. Just flew
exciting.
in.
Yeah, that's why we had to, not why we had to move it, but kind of why we had to move
It's definitely why we had to move it, and it's my fault. So.
I wasn't going to throw you under the bus. I wasn't going to do that.
No, totally my fault.
To give you a chance to say, why you were back in your hometown, because I think that was something we were just chatting about before, and I think it's a really cool, and I would love for people to hear about what's happening and what's going on, like what tomorrow is, what Juneteenth is all about, and sorry, I like to ramble.
No, yeah, it's great. Hey, so tomorrow is Juneteenth, and I actually connected with a friend of mine who was starting to lead some efforts just in a simple way. We have Troost Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri, which is the historical racial dividing line in the city. And it was again structured as such. It was intended to be the racial dividing line, and so it has been this whole time. It's the east and west side. And you might see this in several other cities around the country, because a lot of cities use what J.C. Nichols did here in Kansas City as a model for how they structured their cities to keep these certain kind of people in certain places. So Troost is that place for us. And so my friend who I talked to, really great guy, really strong leader, but he and a couple other people came up with the idea that they would just pray. And that in this time of social unrest and reckoning with our racial struggles in this country, to go to the place of the historical racial divide in our city and just pray, just be a presence there. And he thought he was going to have like 15 people tomorrow on Juneteenth, and he wanted to do it on Juneteenth, which is the celebration of um, the ending of slavery in our country. Um, and it is something that in our, like, I didn't even really recognize growing up as a young Black kid. And so, but it's one of these things that would be good for all of us to celebrate. And this is something that he shared with me. It's like, this isn't just this isn't just Black people's holiday. This should be the whole country's celebration, that we ended this particular way that this thing we call slavery was done. And granted, there were other things that still tailed into the future and into the present as we have it, but at least that was not acceptable anymore by law. So we'll be meeting up there, and it turned into something where hundreds of people initially, 100 churches, I guess, responded within a couple of days. So now there's literally thousands of people who will be standing all along this 10-mile stretch just to pray for an hour tomorrow on the city's racial divide.
That's so cool.
Yeah, man, it's incredible. So I had to jump ship and come all the way from California and just to be a part of it, because it's that momentous, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's just I don't know why that always cracks me up, but it always does when you think about people who like they're doing something because that's what their heart's telling them to do and they think it's important. And like, you know what, maybe 3 people will come, but at least those 3 people will have it. Then it turns into this thing that, you know, people have been hungry for, their
Exactly.
hearts have been crying out for, and they just need someone to
lead it,
to take it. Yeah.
Yep. Just need somebody to lead.
You know,
and that's what I would say. That's what I would say to the people who are listening too. Like, if you have a vision for something in your heart, if you have a thought of a thing that you think needs to happen, it's probably incumbent upon you to lead that effort or to collaborate with others and co-lead that effort. That it's not just to leave it to somebody else. Well, why don't they do this? But if you're aware of the issue yourself, I believe that's the way that, like, you've gotten the word, you've gotten the thing. So it's incumbent upon you that if you have a little idea in your heart of how to potentially improve something, just go do it. Like, if we all did that and connected with each other and collaborated with each other, we would all be working toward trying to do good into sow goodness into our world. And so there'd just be more. It's so simple.
I love that. And just Don, I'm sure you've probably seen it, but anyone watching, if you've never seen just the power of one leader, go on YouTube, type in leadership from dancing guy. It's this. I'm gonna ruin it for you. I'm gonna ruin the whole story. Spoilers. There's just this guy who just is dancing and flailing at a music festival and like just doing it by himself, doing his thing because he's feeling the music. And I'm gonna say he made me feel better. My dancing is not good, but I felt pretty good about it watching
after seeing him.
And I was like, yeah. And then, you know, some one person comes to dance with him, then a friend comes, and all this.
I've seen that, yeah.
Huge thing. And so, you know, I think that's exactly like, you know, I was going to ask what's giving you maybe some hope right now. And you've kind of touched on it here is like, you know, we've got people who have taken the step and we see that. And we just need more of us. I put myself in that. I'm part of us. You know, we need a lot of people who are just going to be willing to step out and say, you know what, we're going to lead for change. And you're going to be pleasantly surprised, I think, by the number of people who are going to say, you know what, we're with you.
Yeah.
With you on that. And I said this, you know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I'll probably say it probably every week. The reasons I get to do it, I'm excited about doing these kind of things is like, I want to be a part, whatever small part of making this world something my 2 girls grow up in. And we talk about this and they're like, that was a thing.
Yeah.
That's what it was like.
Yeah, man, that's beautiful. And you're doing it, and even just facilitating conversations like this where other people can eavesdrop. It's the work is so simple, but if we all have the courage to just act on what we know to be true in our hearts about us as human beings, then the potential becomes almost limitless. I can't even imagine. Because yeah, you do one simple thing, but that's what gives me hope is that you see people's hearts awakening all over the world. All over the world, People are awakening to these needs that we've had all the time, but now they're paying attention to it. And attention is the biggest piece. And that goes back to that idea of kindness. Like, so I say to people that to show kindness in this world, you don't have to pay it back or pay it forward. You just have to pay attention. Because when you pay attention to the needs of another human being and you recognize yourself as like them in any respect, then automatically the goodness in your heart unlocks and wants to go toward that. And then those ideas will start popping. But we just have to have the courage to take action on them. And it's simple action. It's not anything profound. It's just simple. It's posting on Facebook, hey, I'm thinking about sending this girl to nursing school. Like, is anybody in? Or, hey, I want to pray on truce. Like, we'll probably have just a few people show up, but I think it'd be good to do. Like that kind of thing that just ends up being so impactful in ways that we can't even imagine.
I love that. We're kind of right up to time here. I know you got some stuff going on, but two things I wanted to share before I asked you one last thing. One, I got to give a shout out to Nicole Phillips because she got us connected.
Absolutely, man.
Phillips, Sarah.
Love Nicole.
Sarah Tashin, the tax support. So we got to do a series with Nicole. And so just giving you and then, the rest of your team a shout out. I get to, just talk to Sarah the other day and, I'm a avid creeper of Nicole's Kindness podcast. So, got to give them a shout. And then folks, I know this is like, we just get glimpses in these videos and these Facebook Live events. But they're the start of conversation. So if you want to get connected with Don, he has shared his Facebook info there. So facebook.com/doncarter.co. That's also his website. So this is a double whammy. You can you can use this whole thing and it'll get you to two places. But I know that if you want to talk more, Don, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Don he's been more than willing to talk to me about everything and anything and everything. And so I know he's willing to continue those conversations.
If anybody is compelled to reach out to me, please do. You can even email me at don@doncarter.co. I'm just willing. Same as you, Nate.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, man.
Oh, and I appreciate you, Don. It's awesome getting to spend some time with you. And folks, too, if you're looking for some resources, follow our Lost and Found stuff on Instagram and Facebook. It's @ResilientToday. If you're watching this, you're probably aware of our Facebook page. But regardless, we want to make sure that if you are in need of support and you just need someone to chat with, and we're here to help. We are here is our tagline, and it's not just a tagline; it's what we believe. So we want to make sure that we can be there to help out. So reach out to Don, reach out to us. And then before we go, Don, do you have any last thoughts? I don't want to set. I know you and I could probably keep going for
Yeah, we could talk for a while. I mean, my last thoughts.
Everyone would have to sit through it with us.
I mean, it would just be a repeat of a few of the things that I said, but the most important one is that you can show up wherever you are, however you are. But when you engage with other people, being willing to understand first and being a listener will transform any conversation. And so if you're really about positive change in our societies, to whatever end, it could be on a different end of the spectrum, who knows? But if you're really, really serious about it, having that approach to your conversations will produce so much more good for yourself and for whomever is with you than anything else that I can think of. So I would highly recommend and encourage that kind of demeanor and way of being to each other. And that's the essence of kindness. It's connection and it's likeness. So
I love it. Well, thank you, Don. Thank you for spending some time with us.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I said first thing to do once you get off the plane, you hang out with us. I love it.
Yeah.
So I said, everyone, thanks for spending some time, whether it's right now live with us or watching this later. And we'll be back next week with Dr. Erica Whitaker. She is a good friend of mine, works at Black Hills State University, and she's got a lot of good stuff to share. So I hope you'll join us next Thursday. Have a great night, everyone.